Hi. Okay. So, welcome to the most basic intro I can give you for Blender. The most basic of all basic intros. So, I am currently working on Blender 2.83 for very specific reasons that are all Sims related. And but there ha basically from Blender 2.8 on, they changed the way Blender works to be a lot more user friendly. So anything before 2.8, it's got a completely it's similar, but it's got a completely different way it navigates. So when you open up Blender, you'll get something like this screen where it'll ask you if you want to open like a new file or open a recent file. You can just click off that. Real quick, I'm going to turn on my screencast keys so you can see what I'm doing. But so when you open Blender, you're gonna have this default scene set up. So you have your default cube, you have a light, and you have a camera. The most basic thing people usually do is they'll hit A to select everything and delete it, and that'll just set your scene up nice and fresh. But we'll leave it here for now. So I'm gonna start going over just like kind of the basic stuff you can do. But before that, um, this is if you don't have a numpad on your keyboard or if you don't have a mouse with a scroll wheel. So you can go, if you need, those are pretty important things for Blender. So if you go to Edit Preferences and go to Navigation, just kidding, if you go to Input, you can click Emulate Numpad. And what that'll do, if you hover over it long enough, it'll make the 0 to 1 keys on the top of your keyboard act like a numpad. So if you're on a laptop, that's really useful. And you can also emulate 3-button mouse, which is going to make it so that you, instead of clicking the middle mouse button to move around the view, you can use Alt and left mouse. But I have both of those, so I am okay. But that's how to set those up. And those are very important. Okay, so moving the camera. Moving the camera is as simple as clicking in the middle mouse button and moving around. And just the middle mouse will kind of just like rotate around the object. If you do control middle mouse, you will dolly in and out. The same thing you can do the same thing by scrolling the middle mouse button to scroll in and out, zoom in and out. Shift plus middle mouse will pan the camera. So left and right, up and down. So those are your basic kind of just like how to move and look at things in Blender. Let's see. So this is just the perspective view. You also have orthographic views, which are very useful for modeling things and getting perspectives, like proportions right. So on your numpad, you have one, which will go to the front view. And if you hit Control plus any of these, it'll do the opposite. So this is the front view. This is the back view. It looks very similar because we're just looking at a cube. But 1 will be front view. Control plus 1 is your back view. 3 is your side view. Control plus 3 is the other side. And 7 is top down. And Control plus 7 is the bottom, which they look very similar right now because, again, we are just looking at a cube. But also something you can do, 5 on the numpad will toggle in and out of perspective mode. So if you go in to look at your orthographic and it looks like this and it's kind of funky, it's probably because you need to hit 5 on the numpad. Another thing that you can do to go into orthographic views is while you're toggling around with your middle mouse, if you hold down Alt, it'll snap to the orthographic views. So that's a different way to do it. If you're emulating a 3-button mouse, I have no idea how to do that. So I would just use the numpad. But those are your orthographic views. Those are super helpful. Let's go ahead and let's start looking at this UI. So we are in object mode right now. You could do about a million things with Blender. It's really figuring out what you actually want to do with it and going down that road. But I'll just go over some really basic stuff right now. I'm Not going to go into all of these tabs today, but you have just your basic like layout, and then these are all just the other options. So there's stuff for shading, stuff for texture painting. If you really want to composite in Blender, you can do that. All kinds of tabs, sculpting, scripting, everything. This over here is your toolbar. You can hide this with T. So if you want a really clean workspace and you're really pro gamer and you know all the hotkeys, you can hide that. But also if you can do, and it'll also tell you kind of what like it does. Like the moving, and if you hold it long enough, it'll tell you the hotkey. But I don't ever really use this, so I usually hide it. We'll keep it out for now. And we'll show you this toolbar over here. Alternatively, you can click this little arrow. And this is just another helpful toolbar. It'll tell you where the location of an item is. It'll give you like, sometimes if you have like a brush or something open, it'll show you your brush menu. You can change the focal length of your view if you really want to. This kind of, and if you have like add-ons like I have screencast keys, that's what kind of shows up here. You can use N to hide that and bring it back. So along the top here, we have our object mode. So currently we're in an object mode, and if we go into any of these other modes, all of this stuff is going to change. And we'll go into that later, but the main two you're usually going to be in are object mode and edit mode, so don't worry about these too much right now. And then these are just kind of all the like different menus that you probably won't use if you know how to do things, like, and use shortcuts. But the shortcuts for Blender are pretty simple. If we go over here, this is your transform orientations. Don't worry about it too much right now. This is only really useful if you're doing some sculpting and you want to move faces in a certain direction. Same thing goes for the pivot points. Not super useful right now. It'll just, like, if you want to, this is good for, like, I change this to individual origins if I want to rotate things, like, not by the center of them, but by like the center of their objects. It's complicated. Snapping, we'll go over that later, and proportional editing, we'll go over that at a later date too. Over here, you have your view modes. So let's start over here. So this is your viewport shading options. You have wireframe, solid view, texture view. If we had a color on this, you would be able to see it here. So like if I change the color of this material, like blue or something, you'll be able to see it in this view, whereas in solid view, it'll just all be the same gray. And then you have rendered view, which uses the renderer and the lights. You don't want to work in this view. This is just for previewing how it's going to look in a render. So that's all those views over there. So you can see how fast this moves and how slow that moves, because it's trying to render it and get all the light bounces. So it's best not to do any big moves in that one, or unless you want to crash Blender. You have X-ray view, which is good in edit mode, which I will show off later. And then this brings up a gizmo here that you can use to, like, kind of the same thing, move around. So this is another option if you don't have a middle mouse button. You can use the gizmo to move around. I never use this. So you could also, like, grab the hand and you can pan it like that. You zoom in and out by grabbing this. Go into your camera mode. Go out of your camera mode. Go to orthographic mode. Go out of, so yeah, that's kind of what that does. This is your overlays. So this shows your, like, the details, the grid, the cameras. If you click this, it'll get rid of it all. So now it's just floating in blank space. So if your cube is ever floating in blank space, you don't know what you did, you probably turned your overlays off. And no idea what this does. But if you go to viewport shading, there's also more options here. So if you want not all your stuff to be gray, you want it to be like a random color, stuff like that you can do. But so that's all the stuff here. If we move over to this big toolbar over here, so this is your collections. So this lists every object you have in your scene, and it's an easy way to click through stuff. And you can organize them into little folders like you would do in like Photoshop or something. And below that, we have all of our little menu toggle things. A lot of these you're not going to use. It really depends on what you're doing. These first three here, no idea what this does. So don't worry about it too much. These first three here are all rendering focused. So when you want to render out an image at the end of your project. So we have three different render engines. We have Eevee, Workbench, and Cycles. These have been more advanced in 3.0, but in like 2.8, they're kind of just as they are. Eevee is a non-physics based render engine, and it's faster than Cycles. So you can see I'm moving around, not much is happening, but you also can't do a lot of stuff in Eevee. Like, it's not super great at doing transparency, but also don't quote me on that. Workbench, I've never used it. I don't know what it's for. It's like for really fast renders if you need it. Cycles is your main render engine. You want to make sure it's using your graphics card instead of your CPU, or it's going to be way slower. But this is the physics-based render engine that's going to calculate light balances and all this kind of stuff. So all this stuff here is just like the options for the render. So like if you want to go bake out an ambient occlusion map, you can do that here. This is your dimensions, like for your render, like what size you want your image to be. Do you want to render it at half just to make sure it looks good before you render it full? The bigger your image is, the harder it's going to be to render, the longer it's going to take. You can pick what you want to render it out as. More render stuff here. The only thing I really use in this one is the denoising. Since it takes so long to render in Blender and it's always going to be a little bit grainy, Blender has denoising, so it'll smooth it out and it'll take you less time to render it and look just as good as if you took all night to render it. So that's something that you can do there. Never used this. World, you can change the color of your world if you want to, the background, and it'll affect the lighting on your objects. So just a neutral gray is fine probably. But if you want to do that, you can also change it to be a picture. So you can come in here, you can put in an HDRI, and it'll give you some free lighting. Basically, it'll use the lighting from the HDRI to light your object, which is a really fast and easy way to do something. That's the only thing I ever do in here. No clue what this is. I think it's just kind of the same thing as over here. Modifiers are the thing that make Blender really good. It's the thing that sets Blender apart because they are so useful. Modifiers that I use a lot, Decimate, Edge Split, Mirror. Mirror is excellent for modeling. I know when I modeled in Maya, I would have to just get rid of half of my model and then just copy it over after it was done. But in Blender, you can just have a mirrored. Why am I still in this view? In Blender, you can just have it mirroring at the same time. So we'll go over how to use that a little later. There's all kinds of things. You can do physics stuff. You can do particles. Particles are like sprinkles on a donut. If you don't want to model all the sprinkles, you can make a particle system, and you'll have a bunch of sprinkles. So this tab is all about particles, and adding particles, and using particles. This tab is all about physics. You can do cloth physics, soft body physics, fluid physics, add collision to stuff so things aren't physicked through it. No clue what this is. Like, I don't use everything in Blender either. But for a basic just kind of overview, you're probably not going to use it. You can make vertex groups to help with particles. Probably not going to do that anytime soon. Material properties are really important. It'll show you the material that you're working with, and you can adjust things like how shiny something is, or like if you bring your roughness down, things get more shiny. I promise. And they get more mad if you bring it up. You can make things more metallic. You can add image textures, do things like that. But this is your materials. And no clue what this is either. Probably like texture painting or something. But yeah, most of the time you're going to spend is in modifiers, textures, and your rendering stuff. So that's kind of the UI, a basic, terrible overview of the UI. Let me see if I missed anything. All right, let's go over moving things. If you ever lose your camera in your scene, you can just like be like, oh god, where am I? What have I done? Maybe like things are too small and you're just like scrolling forever. You can click on your object in the scene collection and you can hit delete, like the little dot key on your numpad, and it'll snap back to your object and center it in your scene. So let's go over some very important and very basic hotkeys for Blender. So if you click something with the left mouse, it'll select it. If you click off of it, it'll deselect it. Another way to do this is you can hit A and it'll select every object in your scene. So you can see the camera and the light are selected. If you hit Alt A, it'll deselect every object in your scene. So I clicked on my cube and I have selected it, which in the past Blenders it's right click, but now it's left click because it just makes more sense. It makes more sense. I'm not a purist. I'm not a Blender purist. I like left clicking things. So your main things you're going to be doing in Blender, they're over here: moving, rotating, and scaling. So moving is kind of weird. It's not like M to move or anything. It is G. So if you tap G, you're now moving the object. G is for grab. So you are grabbing the object and you're moving it around. That's a good way. That's the way I think about it, at least. If you have decided, oh god, I made a mistake, I need to put this down, you can either click it and Control Z, or you can just right click and it'll stop what you're doing. It's very useful. So after grab, we have scale. And scale and rotate are what you'd think they were. S. Scales. R. Rotates. And it's going to rotate wherever the camera is facing, if you're in this kind of view. So, but if you're in like an orthographic view, it's only going to rotate like based on what you would think if it was an orthographic view. So let's go ahead and let's talk about constraining things to axes. So you've got your like 3D axes. You have X, Y, and Z. X is kind of, if you're facing the front, X is like left to right. Z is up and down. And Y is front and back. So a good way to do things is if you want to move something, but you only want to move it in a certain direction, you can hit X and it'll move it left to right. Or you can hit, maybe you want to go front and back with Y, or Z will go up and down. Am I still screencasting keys? Yes, I am. So you could do that. Same thing with scaling. If you want to scale it only left and right, you can hit X. Y will go front and back. Z will go up and down. You can always right click to get out of that. And then same thing with R. Z will kind of rotate it like if it was an object rotating it on a table. And then the other ones, I just kind of hit it until it's doing what I want it to do. Ugh. Sometimes it can get confusing, so I just keep tapping these letters. You don't have to do anything to like maybe you're like, oh, I didn't mean to do it. I didn't mean to go X, I meant to go Y. You don't have to like untap anything. You can just tap Y and it'll constrain to that. And if you tap it a second time, it'll come back to what it was doing. It'll like turn it off basically. Another thing that you can do is say you want to scale something, but you don't want to scale it up and down. Maybe you just want it to go like left and right, front and back. If you hit Shift Z or Shift any axes, it'll scale it on every axis except that one. So if we go into like front mode and we go S, Shift Z, you see that it looks like it's scaling just X and Y, but when we come out, it's scaling X and Y. It looked like it was just scaling X, now it's scaling X and Y. And it's not changing the height of it. So that's important for stuff if you don't want to like change the height of it, not change the width of it. You can always hit like Shift whatever axes and it'll omit that axis, and then you can turn it on 2 different axes. So like if I go R and I don't want to rotate it on a Z axis. Maybe that's not how it works. I don't know if it works for that, but maybe that's just scaling. Do not quote me on this. Okay. Deleting. So you can delete 2 different ways. You can hit delete and it'll yeet it into the void. It'll be gone forever. Control Z to undo that. you can hit X, and X will say, oh, do you want to delete this? And you can either hit X again. Just kidding, you can't do that. You can click on it. But it's the nice thing is, it'll come up wherever it is, so you're automatically on it. So it'll follow your mouse around. Moving, scaling, we did that. Okay. Let us go into edit mode. So to go into edit mode, you want to select your object. Oh, wait, before that. Let's go over adding a new object. So I'm going to delete this cube. And I'm going to hit Shift A to add something. This is where you add everything. So you can add cameras, you can add lights, you can add physics things, you can add curves, you can add drawings, text, whatever you want. Most of the time you're going to be adding meshes. I'm going to add a cylinder because I'm feeling quirky today. So I added a cylinder and this little box comes out here. So before you click off or do anything, you can open this little box and you can change the properties of the cylinder. Say you want it to have way less vertices, like you're working in a very low poly like mode. So I'm going to hit 12 and I'm going to make this a very small cylinder, or like a lower poly cylinder. You could choose what you want to like fill the ends with. So if you want to just get rid of the ends, or if you want to make sure the ends have geometry, you can change it to triangle fan. We'll just keep it in gone for now, that's fine. And also if you're in an orthographic view and you bring in a plane or something, I usually use this for planes, but you can align it to your view. So if you want to make sure you don't want to like rotate it immediately, or you want it to like face you, I do that for planes more often than I used to do for other things. But then you click off and those options are gone forever. And if you want to change them, you kind of have to go back and make a new cylinder. So we're going to go into edit mode. So you will click your object, which also I forgot to mention, in here you can rename things if you double click on them. Boy. I meant to say boy, but I didn't. Just like Photoshop, you can rename your layers, keep things organized. Okay, edit mode, yes. You click on your object, hit tab, and it'll take you into edit mode. Alternatively, you can also do it up here, but tab is the fastest. And you'll see that our toolbar has changed and given us a bunch of new things. New fun things to do. I don't like using this, so I hide it. And you can see all the points are selected. You can either hit Alt-A to deselect them, or you can just click off. So, now that things have changed a little bit, we have some new icons over here. So we have different ways to select things. So now that we're in edit mode, we can edit just kind of the properties of certain vertices. If you click over this one, this is selecting a whole edge and moving it around. And this one is selecting a face and moving it around. I like to use 1, 2, and 3 with these. I find it's easier to switch between them, which is a great thing. That wasn't in old Blender. It's really good. So you can do 1 for vertices, 2 for edges, and 3 for planes. I find that to be a really good hotkey. Okay. Let me get my notes back. Sorry. So, my plan is to do like a little like build something together over the course of a couple of weeks. So I'm not going to go too much into the things you can do in edit mode because there's just so much. But let's talk about X-ray real quick. I skipped over this. So X-ray mode lets you kind of look through your mesh and see points on the other side. So if something's really like hidden, or if you need to select something that's like flipping into another piece of the mesh, you can use X-ray mode. And these things over here we skipped right here. I'm gonna actually go to 3, select this, hit I, create an inset face, just so I can show this off. So if I want to like snap something, I can use this little snap tool. So you have a couple options. You have increments, vertexes, edges, faces, volumes, blah, 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 more. I've never used these. Like vertex is a really good one. So if I want to snap vertices to other vertices and maybe merge them together later, I can do that. And you just hover over any vertex you want it to snap to. Edges give you a little more flexibility. It'll snap to different edges and faces and so on. So that kind of gives you an idea of what it does. If you want to move an entire edge loop, or if you want to select an entire edge loop, I hit 2 to go into edge mode, and then I'm going to alt click on this, and it'll select every, like, the whole edge loop. As long as it's, like, a valid edge loop and it doesn't have any weird tries or geometry, it'll select the whole edge loop. If it does have weird tries or geometry, and you're having trouble selecting the whole thing, you can use Control, hold down Control and click, and it'll find the shortest path to what you want to select. And that's a good way to do it if you've really messed up your geometry. Let's go ahead and talk about proportional editing. So proportional editing is if you want to move a part of an object proportionally, obviously. So like say I want to move this whole thing up, but I've made this extra geometry and I'm too lazy to select it all. So I could either go in, select everything, and then move it, or I could turn on proportional editing and it'll move it proportionally in a certain way. Sometimes it's not exactly what you want. So sometimes maybe going in and selecting everything, but you can use the scroll wheel to change how much you're affecting. So you can affect it like more or less with your scroll wheel. And if you look in the top right, top left corner, you can see how big your thing is. So sometimes you're like in here and you're like, I don't see my brush size. But if you look in the top left corner, you can see what size it is as you scroll it up and down. So you know you're going in the right direction. And then right click to undo, of course. There's different ways to do this. You can play with them. Smooth is gonna be what you're using most of the time. So let's go over ways to actually select things. So we know how to left click. And now we know how to alt left click, which will select, it'll do the same thing with faces, which is really nifty. Shifting will help select things too. It'll add and it'll subtract. I think control just, control is the same thing. Oh, control is the shortest path one. But there's also a couple different ways to select things. So say I wanted to mirror this mesh and I want to select this half of it. Oh no, it only selected what I could see. There's a way to remedy that. We'll go into X-ray mode. And we can go B, select. Sorry, I didn't explain what I just did there. I did a box select. I did that by hitting B. And you can draw a big box. It'll select whatever in the box. Now you see it's not selecting this because it's not like, it's a big n-gon and I'm not selecting this dot. Basically you have to like hit that dot to do it. But it'll select whatever's in the box as long as it contains these little dots. So that's a certain way to select things. You can also select things with C, which is circle select, and it'll bring up this brush and it'll select whatever you brush across. And if you're like, oh, I accidentally selected something I didn't want to, you can use middle mouse and it'll unselect stuff. But also don't try and, you can't kind of move out of it. Like if you try to like go and move around, you just start deselecting stuff. You actually have to right click to get out of that mode. So you can see, right click, and now you have stuff selected. There's a couple different ways to select stuff. Some other cool, important stuff we can do in edit mode that's gonna save your life. Adding edge loops is a big thing that you can do. So if you hit Control R, you'll add edge loops. If you scroll up and down, you'll add more edge loops. You can add as many as it takes before Blender crashes. Right click will stop. But if you just want to add one, you can click and then it'll let you slide it around. But maybe you don't want it sliding around. Maybe you want it in the middle. If you right click, it'll just put it in the middle. But oh, maybe you didn't want it in the middle actually. If you hit G twice, it'll slide it up and down. And it'll follow the geometry, which is really good. Like you could do the same thing with G and Z in this case, but if your geometry is really weird, like if these faces here are smaller and you're like, oh, I actually wanted to slide this a different place. If you hit G, it's going to try and follow your geometry. See how it's getting smaller and larger. If you just hit G with Z, it's just going to go up and down like that. So 2 Gs, slide. So that's how you add edge loops. And there's just a million things you can do in here. I want to show you guys one more thing before we're done. I'm going to show you a modifier. So I'm going to get rid of this. I'm going to add a cube real quick. I'm going to go in. I'm going to hit Control R to add an edge loop. Right click, keep it in the middle. Look at it from the front with 1. I'm going to grab this, make sure I'm in face mode with 3. Box select with B. Select all of that side. X to delete. And this will bring up the delete menu for the edit mode. And I'm going to delete the faces. And now if I go into mirror, or modifiers, I can add a mirror modifier. And it'll automatically mirror it on whatever axis you want. So x-axis works for us here. You can also mirror certain objects. And then a good thing to turn on is clipping, so that if you move anything in a certain way, like it's gonna meet in the middle no matter what. But I can turn off X-ray. And now when we're working, if we're working on something symmetrical, we only have to do half of the work. Yay! Claps. So mirror modifier is a really good one. But yeah, so that is how you can get around Blender. That's a very basic thing. You can practice moving around, find a setup that works for you. Oh, one more thing. If you need an extra window to do something, you can come down till your cursor makes a little plus sign, and you can make another window. So maybe you want to see the rendered view at the same time as you move around. Really do that. Anyway, that is how to move around Blender, and a very basic thing.